I'll give the word now to Paul Murphy, who was one of the very brave people who boarded the boats, one of the boats, the Irish boat that went to Gaza last week, but whose mission was violently intercepted by the State of Israel.
Thank you very much, Claudia. First of all, I want to thank everybody who played a marvellous role in protesting about our detention around the world in this Parliament. Many MEPs who took actions across the world, many protests in Ireland, hundreds of people protesting, even within Israel itself, protests of people demanding our release. What I'll do is try to, very briefly, because obviously it was a 1 week long period, but condense that into the experiences that we had as the prisoners, how we were taken, violently assaulted and so on, because I think it is illustrative of the way in which the Israeli regime defends its blockade, illegal blockade of Gaza, and you get a microcosm or a fraction really of the way in which the people of Gaza are treated, who in effect are in an open air prison. So we were on, like Claudia was saying, the Irish boat, the MV Saoirse. There was 2 boats as part of this freedom wave, the MV Saoirse and the Canadian boat, the Tahrir. Our boat was on the Friday early afternoon, violently assaulted by the Israeli forces. 5 very large warships surrounded the boats. These were very serious warships with a large number of guns on board, helicopters on board. From those warships came around 20 smaller boats, Zodiacs, boats with high pressure water cannons, and boats designed for boarding the boats that we had. The Israelis surrounded the 2 boats. They deliberately, with their water cannons, created waves in the water to press the 2 boats against each other, which resulted in the 2 boats crashing into each other and a very serious danger of sinking for both boats. They used the high-pressure water to completely douse the boats, which got inside the boats. In the case of the Irish boat, they sprayed water at high pressure onto the bridge of the boat, which caused the electronics to explode, to go on fire on the boat, to mean that the main generator on the boat, which was being used to pump out water that was coming on the boat as a result of the collision, was then gone and was out of action, and more water was being taken on the boat. The Israelis, after surrounding both of the boat, the Israeli forces, came on board with a lot of violence, breaking one of the windows. About 25 very heavily armed soldiers with big machine guns, pistols, knives, tasers, other ammunition came on board. About 25 came on board the Irish boat, pointing weapons in everybody's faces and trying to take control of the boat. They took down the Palestinian flag that was flying on the boat and attempted to replace it with an Israeli flag, which the activists protested about that, and they backed down from replacing it with an Israeli flag. They took down the Irish flag that was on the boat and attempted to steal that flag. Again, we protested about that, and they took the flag out of the bag. On that basis, they effectively took control of the boat, and they brought us against our will into Israeli waters and into the port of Ashdod. There we were going to be, it was clear that the soldiers were then replaced by the police, and it was clear we were going to be violently taken off the boat. And it was at that stage we reminded them that there was an MEP on board, there was other elected politicians from Ireland on board, and on that basis they somewhat backed down from that position, and a woman from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs came on board the boat to reassure us that everything was fine, to make a whole series of promises, all of which were lies. And on that basis, we agreed to leave the boat. Some of the promises she made, which were made in the presence of an official from the Irish embassy in Israel, were that our return home to Ireland would be expedited, which obviously wasn't the case. It took 7 days for us to go home, well over the 72 hours supposedly required by Israeli law. We were promised that we wouldn't be strip searched, when literally half an hour later, after her telling us this, we were strip searched down to our underwear. We were promised that there would be a judge present at the detention centre who would immediately rule on our case, and in order to expedite our departure. We didn't see a judge for days. We were promised that evening we would receive phone calls to family to reassure people that everyone was okay. Again, it was about 35 hours after that moment that we received our first and only phone call, which was one 3-minute phone call monitored by 3 or 4 people and monitored on a computer, in which we were explicitly told we could only talk in good terms about the conditions which we were being held. We couldn't mention anything political, and we were only to speak to members of our families. So a whole series of lies designed to get us off the boat. We were then taken off the boat, strip searched in a dehumanising fashion, taken to a detention centre, asked to sign a deportation order that we refused to sign because it was an acceptance of having entered Israel illegally, when obviously it's completely ridiculous. We didn't enter Israel illegally. We were kidnapped in international waters and brought to Israel against our wishes. And then from there, very early on Saturday morning, about 4 a.m, we were brought to Givon prison, where we were kept until the following Thursday, late afternoon. The conditions in Givon prison initially were very harsh. On the first night, some people were awoken up to 5 times in the course of the evening and told to stand to attention. You had to stand, answer your name, etc. The lights were left on all night. We were allowed no reading material. We were allowed no writing material. We were kept in our cell for out of the first 24 hours, we were kept in our cell for at least 21 of those 24 hours. On the basis of our protests inside the prison and getting organised, and the protests that happened around the world and in Israel, those conditions did improve. We won free association, so the right for the prisoners to associate between the hours of 8 and 8 without being locked in our cell, the right to our reading material, the right to our writing material. In effect, we won political status, which is the correct status for us. But we still only received that one phone call, 3-minute phone call. We were still at all times kept completely isolated from the media. It was clearly the intention of the Israeli authorities to get their version of the story out. Once we came to Ashdod, all electronic equipment was taken from us and has not been returned. I have a laptop provided by the European Parliament that's now in the possession of the Israeli military, a mobile phone, all the cameras, memory cards, anything that had any evidence of what happened on the boats and the violent assault was taken off us. And then the Israeli military released a very selected footage of what happened, which is their version of what happened, which makes everything look tame. So there was an attempt to completely make the story themselves in the media, while we were locked away, kept completely isolated, not able to talk to the media, but also we weren't able even to receive any media. So the Irish Embassy, who visit us on a basically daily basis, tried to give us newspapers with extracts dealing with how the flotilla was being covered at home, and the Israeli jails refused to allow us to get that access to the media, to keep us completely disoriented. We weren't allowed watches in the prison. The clock for the first 2 days was deliberately wrong and misleading in the prison, just to create a situation of disorientation where you don't know what's happening, and isolation. So that went on until, well, for some peaceful protesters, until the Thursday, when, originally, one of the things was just completely misleading information on an ongoing basis from everybody to the Irish Embassy, to ourselves. So some people would come and tell us that we're going to be held indefinitely, that Israeli state has the right to hold us indefinitely. The judge who came told us that, person from the Interior Ministry told us that, which was completely illegal and incorrect. And then we were told via the Irish Embassy that we would leave on the Monday night originally, which is when the 72 hours expired, then the Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday. And it was only then on the Wednesday afternoon that the first protesters were taken away, which we thought they were taken to an airport and to be brought away, but they were actually brought to another detention centre, which I'll describe in a moment. And then on the Thursday, they were due to fly in the morning. And first of all, the Israeli Embassy in Ireland, and I presume internationally, has released a story saying that British Airways refused to take the protesters. There were 7 people due to travel on a British Airways flight. The Israeli authorities had 7 tickets for the 7 protesters to take that flight. They only brought 2 of the activists to the airport. the other were left in their cell in Ben Gurion Airport, near Ben Gurion Airport. The 2 that were brought there were then brought to the aeroplane, were brought away from the aeroplane, were searched again at length and for a long period of time. Were then brought back, the airplane was gone, and oh well, you've missed your flight. The same almost happened again to a later flight that they were due to get, where this time all 7 were brought to the flight, but 5 were allowed to board. 2 who will be identified as the organisers were taken away, were searched again at length, designed to make them miss the flight. Then they were brought back to the flight, but the flight actually hadn't gone yet. It was delayed for other reasons. So the Israeli authorities, the people driving the van, saw that the plane was still there, stopped the van and said there's a problem with the passports, and drove back to the detention centre, which then that story was completely forgotten because there was no problem with the passports whatsoever. But it was, and then finally those 2 got on a flight that evening, again against the wishes of the authorities, who said that they had missed the flight, that it was too late to check in. It was only someone in the detention centre checked in for them, and then they were able to leave. So it was clear that on the Thursday, the Israeli authorities, and that's what this was all about, it was about punishing people who had engaged in this protest, to send a message not to participate in attempts to break the blockade again, and also a massive insult to the Irish Embassy that had played a key role in organising these tickets. And the Irish Embassy was outraged in Israel. We left on the Friday morning. The conditions on Thursday night in the detention centre were horrific. We were there for one night. I shared a cell with 6 other people from different countries who were being expelled from the country, from Israel. The light was left on all night. You had only the clothes you had on you. People were locked in the cell, and that was it. If people wanted to go to the toilet, they just were ignored. People weren't allowed to smoke cigarettes. There was human excrement smeared on the walls in the cell. It was really, really horrific conditions designed to send a message. Finally, we arrived home on the Friday. Obviously, very, very happy to be home. The main point for me, it's not that, it's outrageous how we were treated as, peaceful activists. But it is the fact that the Israeli authorities act in such a way, a peaceful activist trying to break the siege of Gaza, it shows how the people of Gaza are treated. It shows how Palestinian political prisoners are treated. The 1.6 million people in Gaza, we had running water at all stages. 100,000 of them don't have access to running water. So that's the real point. In terms of what I would raise as a demand, I think there has to be a response. It's not acceptable that the Israeli authorities are able to operate in this way with impunity and break laws repeatedly. We have raised the demand in Ireland, and I'll raise it here again, that the Israeli ambassador to Ireland should be expelled from the country. On a European level, I would call for the EU-Israel Association Agreement to be suspended until the blockade of Gaza is lifted. And I've sent a letter this morning to President Buzek, who did on the Thursday call for my release, calling for the credentials to be suspended from the Israeli embassy officials in the European Parliament, that to treat 15 EU citizens like this, it can't go unanswered, and the misinformation that was given. We have copies of the letter to President Buzek that will be distributed.